Good day to everyone watching this webinar. Before I begin, I want to thank my friend Jefferson Mendez for inviting me on this important event that he organized. I'm delighted by his efforts in advocating public history, a very important field, especially in light of the things that are happening in our country in the present. And I wish that he continues in such endeavor because it is my conviction that he would contribute a lot to our campaign towards a public history that is instrumental for the building of a more just society. So let me begin discussing the topic that Jeff asked me to address. Under the current political dispensation, there is a systematic effort to disparage the discipline of history's ability of truth-telling. Recently, history is painted as mere gossip or chismis in the vernacular. Senator Amy Marcos and actress Ella Cruz, for instance, even quoted some Western writers like Oscar Wilde, Albert Hubbard, Gore Vidal, and George Santayana to prove history's resemblance to gossip. Well, while we reject, rather, the absolute objectivity of history as expressed by positivism, we must also reject the absolute subjectivity of history as expressed by postmodernism. Do we affirm that there is a grain of truth to the presupposition behind their insistence that history is like a gossip, that is, that there is an element of subjectivity in history because of the interpretive power of historians? We must also assert the methodological nature of history as a social scientific enterprise. And among the basic tenets of this historical methodology is the importance, of course, of using reliable sources. In the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, this category of reliable sources is not limited anymore to written documents. In the face of the digitalization of human communication, pressure towards public history, as well as the popularization of virtual spaces brought by the worldwide pandemic, reliable sources now include audiovisual sources. Yet unlike the traditional written materials, wherein there are multiple safeguards of reliability, for example, from editorial interventions up to publication, the democratized nature of digital sources makes it more vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation. Thus, if the canon of historical methodology is highly needed for written materials, it is more urgent in the case of audiovisual sources. The discernment for reliability is also necessary in the topic assigned to me for this event, that is, the audiovisual sources of Christian history in the Philippines. Because of the limitation of time, because I'm only here to speak for 20 minutes, this lecture is neither exhaustive nor critical, meaning I will only present some sampling of reliable audiovisual sources on the field, and this presentation is merely descriptive. We will not go as far as showing how these materials passed the reliability test of historical methodology. There are many reliable audio-visual sources on the Filipino Christian history. I want to present some of these by dividing them into two categories based on genre. Number one, virtual lectures, and number two, documentaries. Let us start with virtual lectures. Virtual lectures can include either lectures done physically and recorded to be available online, or lectures which are directly delivered in virtual spaces such as Zoom Meeting, Discord, Twitter Spaces, Facebook Live, and Google Meet, among others. Platforms which are popularized during the pandemic with the rise of the phenomenon of what we call webinars. In this category of virtual lectures, we can cite, for instance, a lecture by Ateneo de Manila University Professor Rene Haveliana entitled Growing Roots, Christian Art in Colonial Philippines. The lecture was delivered for the occasion of the setting up of an exhibit in the University of San Francisco called Galleons and Globalization, California Mission Arts and the Pacific Rim. The record of the lecture is archived on the website of Asian Art Museum. Here, Haveliana discussed the growth of Christianity in the Philippines during the Spanish period by looking at Christian art as sources on this topic. Related to this is the lecture by architect Clydeson Joseph Malyari entitled Church Architecture in the Philippines. It is the 21st among the series of webinars dubbed as Prostalk by the Buildy TV and is archived in the website of Buildy. Malyari shared in the lecture his experiences in church architecture, as well as some details of the field and its importance. The National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or NHCP, also organized a similar webinar on church architecture. Delivered on March 25, 2022, the title of the webinar by Father Dexter Santillan is Meanings of Church Architectural Features. Father Santillan is the current Vice Rector of the Sancta Maria Mater et Regina Seminarium. The record of the webinar can be watched in the Facebook page of NHCP Museo ng Libingan sa ilalim ng lupa ng Nagkarlan. Unlike architect Malyari's focus on the technicalities of church architecture, Father Santillan's emphasis is on the symbolisms of church architecture as reflections of the Filipino Christian natives' resistance against Spanish domination. Aside from arts and church architecture, another important aspect on the history of Catholicism in the Philippines is the issue of saints. On this, we can cite webinar by the University of the Philippines Department of History in cooperation with the National Quincentennial Committee entitled Saints of Resistance, Devotion in the Philippines Under Early Spanish Rule by Professor Christine H. Lee, who obtained her PhD from Princeton University. Actually, the webinar is a book launching event of her book with the same title of her webinar. The webinar was streamed in the Facebook page of National Quincentennial Committee on June 24, 2022. Professor Lee explores in the webinar how the Filipino natives refashioned these devotions to saints from being foreign imports from colonial masters to being symbols of resistance against the same colonial masters. Meanwhile, another main branch of Christianity which also became the subject of many audiovisual sources is Protestantism. In this area, one important resource is the virtual lecture by Dr. Ben Ngayaan, a church historian of St. Andrew's Theological Seminary. The title of the lecture is The Influx of Protestantism of Protestant Churches. The lecture was hosted by and streamed through the Facebook page of National Council of Churches in the Philippines, or NCCP, on September 30, 2021. Here, Dr. Ngayaan shared the development of different Protestant missions in various parts of the country as well as the statistical growth of Protestant churches. Another webinar by NCCP is the lecture entitled Going Organic, Protestant Christianity During the War and the Post-War Period, 1941 to 1948. It is presented by Dr. Ferdinand Año, a theologian from the Union Theological Seminary. Like Dr. Ngayaan's lecture, it was also archived in the Facebook page of NCCP. Dr. Año discussed here the various efforts among Protestant churches toward organic unions during and after the Second World War. Eufemio Agbayani, a researcher of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, also delivered a virtual lecture on the history of Protestant Christianity in the Philippines, entitled isang maiksing kasaysayan ng protestanteng Kristyanismo sa Pilipinas. It was part of the Vival Publishers series of webinars with the theme Kasaysayan Kay Saya. The webinar broadcasted on January 19, 2021 and archived in the YouTube channel of the prominent Filipino public historian Michael Charleston Xiao Chua. It gives short overview on the general history of Protestantism in the Philippines, from the arrival of Protestant missionaries during the start of American colonialism to the establishment of various Protestant institutions and participation of some Protestants to prominent political positions. Since we have already mentioned the public historian Xiao Chua, it is important to note that he is also a Protestant who had some virtual contents on the history of Protestantism in the Philippines. Xiao Chua became well known to many through Xiao Time, a 2 to 3 minute short segment in PTV News, a television news program. Aired from 2012 to 2014, Showtime had 641 episodes. Some of these short lectures have something to do with Protestant history, like the episode Binhi ng Protestantismo, wherein he shared the genesis of Protestant faith in the country, even before the formal start of American Protestant missions, through the life story of Nicolas Manrique Alonso Laliave. Another episode of Showtime related to Protestantism is entitled, Ano ba ang Protestantismo at Pagiging Born Again? In this episode, Shaw talked about the beginning of Protestantism in Germany and its connection with the Protestant presence in the Philippines. Aside from Protestantism, Showtime had many other episodes in other topics within Filipino Christianity. Some of these episodes are the following. For example, Mother Ignacia del Espiritu Santo, Astig na Madre, Beatifikasyon ni Justo Takayama Ukon, isang Hapones sa Pilipinas, si Gregorio Aglipay at ang Iglesia Filipina Independiente, Saint Martin of Tours sa Taal, pinakamalaking simbahan sa Asia, and kahulugan ng mga tradisyon ng simbahang Katolika. All of these and other episodes of Showtime are archived both in the YouTube channel of PTV and of Xiao Chua himself. Apart from short videos of Showtime, Xiao Chua also had some formal lectures related to Filipino Christian history, such as the webinar entitled 500 Taon ng Pananampalataya ng Pilipino kay Kristo, isang paglalakbay sa nakaraan. He delivered this virtual lecture for the students of San Carlos Seminary on February 16, 2021. The webinar can also be found in the YouTube channel of Xiao Chua. He gave a general overview on the history of Christianity in the Philippines in this lecture, with special emphasis on the Filipino identity and agency. On a more recent history of Christianity in the Philippines, one interesting virtual lecture is the webinar entitled The Religious Sector and Martial Law Era by Dr. Christopher Esquejo, a Protestant historian and faculty member of the UP Department of History. The webinar, which is part of the series of lectures called #Throwback Kasaysayan, can be watched in the Facebook page of Quarantalk Media. Here, Dr. Esquejo discussed the various responses by Catholic and Protestant churches to the government during the martial law period. The second category of audiovisual sources on our topic is documentary. Like virtual lectures, there are also many documentaries on Filipino Christian history that are in existence. One example is Kasaysayan ng Aglipayan Church. It is available in the YouTube channel of Karunungan TV. Karunungan TV caters materials which contain basic information on diverse areas such as health, practical skills, entertainment, culture, and history, among others. This particular documentary of Karunungan TV discusses the short history of Iglesia Filipina Independiente or IFI from its birth during the last years of Spanish colonialism up to the contemporary period, showcasing some of its prominent parishes in the present. On documentaries related to the history of Christianity in a sample Philippine locality, one can cite the documentary Christianity in Palawan. It narrates the short history of Christianity in Palawan from the coming of Magellan to the establishment of churches in the island. The documentary can be accessed in the Facebook page of Paragua. This Facebook page contains various videos on Palawan, such as the island during the Japanese occupation, the Tabon Man, the Palawan ethnic group, tourist spots in Palawan, the Kalayaan Island, and different localities of Palawan such as Puerto Princesa, Batarasa, El Nido, Culion, Nara, Rojas, and many more. Meanwhile, aside from short videos and lectures, Xiao Chua also has some documentaries related to Filipino Christian history. One of these is the documentary Rise of the Nation, The Martyrdom of Gumbursa. It is a documentary created by Parkumentary, a project of National Parks Development Committees. It is aired in the Facebook page of National Quincentennial Committee and is also available in the YouTube channel of Xiao Chua. One of the major denominations within the mainline Protestantism is Baptist. On this topic, there is the documentary entitled History of Baptist Church in the Philippines. It was made available by an evangelical Christian named Ens Indongsan through his YouTube channel Life in Christ. The documentary shows the history of the Baptist Church in the Philippines from the coming of Braulio Manican and Eric Lund in Iloilo on May 3, 1900s, up to the establishment of Luzon Convention of Southern Baptist Churches in 1959. On the side of some Catholic groups, there is also the documentary entitled Vincentians in the Philippines, History and Present Work. It is available on the website Congregation of the Mission. Well, I want to end this short lecture by giving an important note on the selection of materials presented here. I have not taken audiovisual materials created by random people and can be found in random sites. No? If you would notice, many of the materials presented here are made by people who are experts themselves, no, in the respective fields. I have cited, for example, lectures and documentaries made and delivered by historians from UP and Ateneo, theologians and church historians from Union Theological Seminary, St. Andrew's Theological Seminary, as well as public historians, etc. We also access Facebook pages and YouTube channels of reputable institutions such as National Historical Commission of the Philippines, National Council of Churches in the Philippines, PTV, and Asian Art Museum, among others. The reason behind this is that one of the main criteria of reliability of sources is, of course, the expertise of people and institutions who made them or who made this audiovisual sources. Thus, though we are shifting from traditional historical sources such as documents to more technologically advanced ones like audiovisual materials, the reputation and expertise of people who made such materials is still very important. Um, so that's all. I hope this lecture provided you some insights on audiovisual sources related to the history of Christianity in the Philippines. If there is anyone interested in the slides, you can email me at mjpascuasantos@gmail.com and I will send to you a copy of this presentation. Again, Good day and thank you all for listening.